welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosatris, and I just finished reading The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson for the first time, and I wanted to give my thoughts on it. I have DNF'd this series twice, and it's always been kind of my white whale, and I've always wanted to kind of get through it because there was stuff that I liked about it, but there was just, I don't know, certain instances that just wasn't connecting with me. Now, when I first read it was in junior high. I read The Eye of the World, not this edition, obviously. And to be honest, it was this review that kind of threw me off the first time, because when I read it as like a teenager, my brain thought that this was like, it was set in Middle Earth, and it was like a continuation of Lord of the Rings, or maybe a prequel or something, but it was somehow connected. And so I was like, okay, well that sounds interesting, because at that point it didn't really feel like there was a lot of like huge epic fantasy that I was aware of, aside from like Narnia and Lord of the Rings. That was kind of it. I'm sure there was others at the time, but I wasn't aware of them. I was kind of dumb. I thought kind of, Lord of the Rings was sort of its own thing, and there wasn't really other things like it, if that makes sense. I don't know. I was kind of a sheltered kid. But, so the first time I read it, I misunderstood the premise, and I was really confused. I didn't quite get it. I couldn't follow it. I was looking for the wrong things, and I was waiting for certain characters to show up. So I was like, nah, this isn't really my thing, so I'm not reading it. Then I tried reading the series again, actually a few years ago, and I don't know what was going on. My brain just wasn't with it. I was having trouble focusing. I was going through it in audiobook form, because I thought maybe that would be sort of more interesting, and I heard the audiobooks are good. And for whatever reason, I was listening to it. Maybe it's because I wasn't listening to it on the right speed. I was listening to it too slowly. I couldn't follow it. Like, I just really had trouble following it. But I slogged through and made it to book 5, The Fires of Heaven. And I was so lost. I didn't know what was going on. I was like, I don't think this is for me right now. So a few years later, which is now 2 years ago, I decided to try it again, but this time I was going to read it like in physical form. And so I read the first 5 books in physical form, and there was something, I don't know what it was. The planets aligned in a certain way, but that's when it connected to my brain. It's like the little gears finally clicked and things started moving. And so that's when I really became obsessed. Once I got up to book 5, I was really busy, and I was just kind of excited to get through it. So that's when I switched back to the audiobooks, because I still had all the audiobooks from my first attempt. And I turned up the speed a little bit so I could follow it better. And I was already so invested in the world that it just worked. And so I raced through the series. Well, not race, because it took me 2 years to get through the whole thing. I was reading other things in between, but it finally connected. And so I made it to the end of the series, and as soon as I finished it, I immediately started listening to New Spring, because I was like, I'm not ready to let this world go. And that's a prequel, and it feels kind of right to kind of how the world works. When you end it, you go back kind of to the beginning. And so I really enjoyed it this go around. It was a really epic journey, and I don't know, maybe just because I wasn't in the mood for it at the other 2 times that I read it. It felt like it took time for me to like really get what was going on and really connect with it. And so now I'm going to do my thoughts on the series as a whole now that it's done, finally. And I know there's a lot of these videos on YouTube anyway, but it's usually a lot of them are from people who kind of grew up with the series. They grew up waiting for each new book. They've reread it a couple times, so they're really familiar with it. But this is the first time I've read it. I've just finished it a couple days ago. And so I wanted to give my thoughts as like a first-time reader, who isn't really that invested in the fandom yet. Like, I feel like now that I've read it, I can now go in because I'm not worried about spoilers. But I wanted to just give my thoughts. So the first thing was, what was good about it? And I'll just say the character arcs are incredible. They're very satisfying. It's a 14-book series, 15 if you count the prequel, and there's long character arcs, and you take these characters who start out as like teenagers, and I think that's the span of the series is something like 2 or 3 years, I think. I might be wrong about that, but you do see them grow and change and evolve, and that was just wonderful. I also really, really like how we get to see the female characters, especially from kind of the main group from Emmons Field at the beginning. We get to see them kind of outgrow the kind of old-fashioned beliefs that kind of held them back in their hometown. Like, there's a lot of things that they take from where they grew up with that gives them strength, and makes them kind of good leaders and good scholars and all this kind of stuff. But it was really cool to see them kind of slowly deconstruct the kind of outmoded beliefs that had kind of held them back. They were, at the beginning of the series, they're very comfortable in their community, their small community. It's out of the way. They know where they stand, they know what their roles are, and they're very kind of in a box, and they're like, this is a good box, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm comfortable. And so over the course of the series, they get thrown into like these epic, massive things that are happening across the whole world, and you really see them kind of shed some of those things that were kind of holding them back and break out of their boxes and really become the best versions of themselves. And I just loved that. The characters, the female characters especially, are some of my favorite characters of the series. Another thing that I really liked about the series was how it handled fanaticism, especially with the White Cloaks. The White Cloaks made me so angry for so many of the books, but like in a way that like you're supposed to. It's kind of like, characters you're supposed to hate kind of thing. Like, they're meant to be just really frustrating, closed-minded characters that you can't speak to. And I really like how they're just a really good metaphor eternally for things that, people in like the world face, especially in North America. It could be like, they could be like the KKK, or like the Westboro Baptist Church, or like the Proud Boys. It's like this self-governed militia that has kind of fanatical beliefs about what is right and wrong, and they just impose their will on everyone depending on, or like regardless of what kind of the laws of the land are. They think that they're the only ones that are right, and the only ones who are going to make any kind of difference in the world, and they're dangerous as a result of that. But what I liked about it is that they didn't just become like an enemy to be vanquished. It wasn't just like, in like the Power Rangers, you've got like the putties, and they just are this kind of faceless enemies that are thrown at you, and they're, dispatched, and that's it. That isn't what the White Cloaks are. They really become something that has to be deconstructed over time, and so that's why there is no kind of, epic, huge conflict with the White Cloaks at the end. It's more the people who are in that kind of insular world, that fanatical mindset. It's just kind of slowly deconstructed over time, because any kind of group like that, the one thing that they're terrified of above everything else is a fear of change, and they don't want things to change. And so you can't just give them one thing of logic and poof, they disappear. You really have to, the only thing that can work against a group like that is deconstruction from the inside out. And so I really, really appreciated how that was written. It was really good. Also, I love the magic system. The one power and the true power, and Sidene and Sidar, and the different elemental like subsets of that, and how it's how it works. It's just really cool, and it's great to see kind of how the character's understanding of the magic system changes over time. Some of the best moments in the whole series are when characters discover something new that can be done within this magic system, because the way the story is set up, it's kind of this endless cycle of just like millennia, like vast sweeping ages, and so things get lost, things get rediscovered, and in the time period that the book is set, there's kind of this idea that back in the Age of Legend, there was a lot more knowledge of how the magic system worked, and there was a lot more stuff that could be done. And so a lot of that knowledge has been lost by the time we get to this one, which is like the third age. And so you've got this sense of like, there's people who claim to know everything there is to know about how the magic system works, and then there's other people that are honestly trying to like reconstruct the knowledge that they used to have back in the day. And so it's really cool when you have a character figure something out and discover a new thing that can be done with the magic. And that leads to some of like the coolest moments in the whole book, where they figure something out. And I love that sense of discovery. And then finally, the last bit of praise that I'll give is sort of double-sided, much like Saidin and Saidar. But I really like how Robert Jordan writes female characters. He writes women well, in that they're not kind of one-dimensional, they're not silly and damsel-y, they're not like placeholders in any way, and they're not plot points. Like, if you look at something like Lord of the Rings, I think there are some really incredible female characters in his kind of Middle-earth world, but a lot of them sort of exist to sort of serve a purpose. And so you've got some characters who just exist to kind of give out information, and then you've got other characters who exist to sort of help other characters. And in this one, I didn't feel that way. I felt like the female character's story was really as important as the male character's story. It didn't feel like a guy's story. It was very balanced and equal, and everyone had sort of interesting character arcs and storylines, and everyone was kind of important to the main plot in equal ways, and I appreciated that. It was very satisfying. The characters all felt like real people, and they all felt complex and human in good ways. So I thought that was good. Okay, so now I want to get into some of the criticisms of the series, and in starting that, I wanted to go back to the question of kind of how Robert Jordan wrote his female characters, because even though they are complex and interesting and well written, I will say that one criticism is that it takes him a few books before they don't feel like stock characters. He uses a lot of stock phrases to describe them, and it becomes a point where certain characters are kind of solely defined by this one thing. You know, characters like Siwan Sanche, she grew up in a fishing village, and so she has like a fish-related metaphor or idiom for every situation, and it's cute, like it fits her character well, but it gets to the point where like it kind of feels a bit labored, because when you first kind of meet her and you kind of get to know her as a person, not as this huge, you know, imposing figure, you realize she just uses this stuff all the time. And so it's like her whole personality is like, you know, sturdy fishing peasant who knows all this stuff, and that's kind of her thing. Also, you've got Nynaeve, who, you know, she tugs her braid, which is a nervous habit, and it's a real thing. Like that's a thing that people do, but the braid tugging is used so much that it doesn't feel like a habit, and it just feels like Jordan didn't really know what to do, and so he had her tug her braid. It's like she does it for everything. Also, there's stock phrases like, you know, she folded her arms beneath her breasts, and that's used so much that it almost becomes like an in-joke, because like there's no other way that anyone folds their arms or does anything else with their hands. That's the only thing that so many of the women characters do. And it just feels like he wasn't as confident with writing the female characters as he was the male characters, and so he had to kind of fall back on stock phrases and kind of stereotypical things just to kind of keep the characters going. Now, I do know that his widow helped him a great deal in creating the female characters and writing them, and you can see her influence over time, because he gets more comfortable writing them. The characters stop feeling like, you know, kind of cardboard cutouts of like a strong woman, and genuinely just become like interesting people in their own right. They become, you know, they have insecurities, they have strengths, they have things that they're going for, and there's things that they're running from, and you just kind of stop thinking about them as sort of, a bit of a cardboard cutout. It's kind of like, the TV show pilot episode where they have to show that a character is like a strong woman, and so they just rely on a lot of tropes and stereotypes at first to kind of convey to the audience, hey, this is a strong female character, but she still feels kind of flat. It's like there's just kind of predictable phrases that she'll use, and there's like scenes that always happen in those kinds of stories. And you're just like, okay, can we see her as a person and not as like a fanboy's fantasy of like what a strong woman character is, please? And so they do eventually become really wonderful, incredible characters over time. But at the beginning, it can be a little frustrating. They do feel a bit flat. Another criticism would be the pacing. And this is something that it's not news to anyone. It's a long series. It's really hard to keep a long series consistently paced well. And there is a section, some people call it the slog, but I genuinely only felt like there was one book that kind of felt like a slog. But there is a part kind of in the middle of the series, well, not the middle, kind of just past the middle, where you have characters who are going on kind of a side quest. There's like 3 characters that are sort of, there's a goal that they're trying to attain, and it takes them like 3 books to accomplish that goal. And so it feels like for a long time, the summary of their activities in a certain book is like, so-and-so continued to do this, or so-and-so continued to search for that. And there's no resolution. And when you do get resolution, it doesn't feel satisfying enough to be worth that long of a build-up. So it's like if it takes 3 books to do something, when you finally do it, it should feel huge and amazing. And it's just kind of like, oh, and then it was accomplished, but now there's other stuff to do and we're moving on. So, I think that can throw some people off, but I will say just stick with it. It is ultimately really satisfying. And even the sloggy books have really great moments where characters accomplish great things, and it feels like the plot moves forward, the mythology is deepened, and it's interesting. So, with that said, I don't really think the slog is really a thing, but there are a few character plot lines that I think are dragged out a bit too long, but, we'll just move on from that. And then also there is a moment in one book, and I won't give any spoilers, but there is a moment where something earth-shatteringly huge happens at the end that kind of changes the status quo for everyone. It rewrites, everything in a big way. And then the book after it jumps back in time for a bit and leads kind of up to it to see what other characters are doing. And when we finally catch up to the present of like what happened, I don't feel like the characters really react to it. There's a lot of suspicion. There's has this really happened? I don't believe it. And we don't really get that moment of someone realizing that things have changed in a big way. We don't get that kind of aha, wow moment. It's more just like people slowly realize it over time. And then in later books, they're kind of looking back and they're like, yeah, that was one of like the most important moments in history. And it's like we never really got that feeling of like the scope, because the way the books are written, it's very tight third person. And so we see everything through the eyes of different characters. And so if a character doesn't understand something or is confused by something, it isn't really explained until we kind of get to it later and have another character see like what their thoughts are on it, or they explain it. And so there's a couple moments when like something huge happens and you're like, what's happened? And you kind of, characters slowly realize what happened over time, but there isn't really like a big objective, like, wow, this is huge and this changed kind of moment where people realize what's happened. So that was another criticism I had, but it's kind of a nitpicky thing because ultimately it's still very incredible. And my final criticism is with the final 3 books, I think Brandon Sanderson did a really excellent job with the monumental task he was given. And for the most part, I think the final 3 books are really good. The ending is very satisfying. It's great. It's big, it's epic, it's everything you would have wanted. But there were a couple characters, specifically Matt and Nynaeve, and I won't give any spoilers, but there's a couple characters who it was very clear that he wasn't super familiar with what their voice should be, and wasn't really certain what to do with them. They both have really important parts to play in the finale, but I feel like they just feel a bit off, especially Nynaeve. Like, Matt is a little off. It doesn't quite feel like him, but his story is still really important to the thing. But Nynaeve is she's kind of window dressing for the finale. She's there and she's playing an important part, but she's just kind of off to the side for a lot of it. And I really wanted to see her play a huge part in the finale, and in a way she does, but we don't see her as a person. It's more just like as a cog in this big wheel that's happening, but like we don't get her story. Like, there's not really a character reason. It's more she's just there for functional reasons. She's a stable pillar in the setup, but it just, I don't know, I felt like we needed to have a big moment with her, like a character moment, and I don't feel like we got a lot of those. So last little bit, I wanted to go over my favorite characters, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but my favorite characters for the whole series: Moraine, Egwene, Perrin, Rand, and Siwan Sanche. I loved those characters so much, and their plots were just long and complicated and satisfying, and it's just, they have just such like powerful finales, and it was wonderful. I loved seeing the characters grow and evolve and change and learn new things about themselves, and it's going to be so cool to go back and reread this in the future and see kind of where they started and then go from there, because they both have or all of them just have a long distance that they travel. I think my all-time favorite character ever is probably Egwene, but it's really hard to pick a favorite because I love Perrin's story too. But Egwene's story is just incredible from start to finish. I love it. She has lots of highs and lows. For a while, she kind of becomes quite ruthless and terrifying, and then kind of comes back from that and is able to just become this just incredible hero. And I just loved her character so much. My favorite book in the series is impossible to pick, but my two, kind of the ones that I loved the most, are probably The Dragon Reborn, which is book 3, and then The Gathering Storm, which is book 12, I think. Yeah, it's the third from the end. Both of those just have these kind of apotheosis moments for big characters where they just discover something amazing about themselves or accomplish something amazing, and it's just so much fun to see them kind of step into the roles they were destined to be, and I just love that. So overall, I think this was a great series. I do want to read it again. It was a lot of fun, and if you're concerned about the length, I would say find a format that works for you, because like for me, it took time to figure it out. For some, I'd say maybe it'd be better to read them physically or an ebook. Others, maybe audiobook would be better. There are new audiobook editions coming out. They've done the first 3, but it's with Rosamund Pike, who plays Moraine in the Amazon series, and she does a really excellent job. I think the next time I read through it, I'm gonna do her narration, and obviously they've only done the first 3, so it's going to take a while before the series is complete, and I really hope that she does all of them, but at least we have like her narration for the first 3, which kind of form sort of a prologue trilogy in a way. So regardless of if we ever get the rest of it, at least we have those first 3. So there's different narrators. Kate Redding and Michael Kramer do the main audiobook series, and they've done all of them. They do a really good job, but I will say the books were published out of order, like the audiobooks, and so the pronunciation of certain characters changes depending on kind of if they were published early, they were pronounced one way, and then when they kind of caught up with the rest of the series and were moving forward, they were then pronounced a different way. So certain characters like Mogadine are going to be pronounced differently in different books, and so that can be kind of unusual. But for the most part, the two narrators did a really good job. So find what works best for you, and if it's not your thing, that's fine. You don't have to read them. You can always watch the TV series. The TV series is a very different beast. It's kind of set up as like a different turning of the wheel, so it's not the events of the book. It's like a different parallel universe version of it that happened in kind of a different like turning. The rules are a little bit different. The plot is a little bit different. The way the magic works is a little bit different. So you kind of have to disconnect the Amazon series from the book series because it's telling a different story. The big general beats are kind of the same, like you have a lot of the same characters, but the way things play out is different. And so I'm really curious to see how that goes, and I really hope they're able to actually finish the series, because with streaming series, it's really easy for them to just make it a few seasons and then they get canceled. So I hope that doesn't happen. I know some people criticize them for being really different from the books, but they're not meant to be exactly the same as the books. They're telling a different story, and so the events are slightly different. And the Wheel of Time does have a multiverse aspect to it. You've got the world of dreams, and you've got parallel versions of the wheel, and you've also got different turnings of the wheel where things happen again and again and again in slightly different ways. So it's set up in a way that you could tell like not a reboot, but like a different version of the story and still have it fit in the universe. So I'm not too concerned about that. But I really enjoyed reading the series. I'm almost done reading New Spring, which is the prequel, which is also really good. Although I would say if it's your first time reading it, don't read New Spring until the end. It is a prequel, but there is some spoilers in there for things that you learn over the course of the series. So once you've read the whole series, for sure, definitely read New Spring at the beginning, because that's kind of where it's supposed to be. But it will spoil things if you read it before having ever read anything else in the series. So just a heads up. But with that, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and happy reading. Bye.